Hey everybody, we're getting set up over here. Patient. We got like a full-on studio, which is like really cool. You guys will see it in the YouTube later, but it's great.
We're setting up, so just a few more minutes and they'll be going live. We're miking them now.
All right, well, we are setting up over here for video on our end. Want to get this spaces set up and launch it because we are coming to you live from Brooklyn, New York right now in the studios of Coinage Media here, and very excited to have a nice chat today with the tech lead for THORChain, Chad Barraford, in studio with us. And today's discussion's a very interesting one for people who don't know anything, I think, about decentralized exchanges, which, obviously the THORChain community who's on this space is with us would definitely know a lot about decentralized exchanges. But if you're new to the crypto space, it's a topic that might need some clarifying. So Chad, very happy to have you in here. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me, Zach.
Let's get started, I guess, by just kind of discussing, and we're still setting up on our end for video, just for background on Coinage. It is a Web3 community-owned crypto show that is owned by a lot of smart people in crypto, including yourself.
Yep.
You have SBF and John Wu from Avalanche also as NFT holders. The whole idea being that we talk about things that it's not just what I think is worth talking about, but what the community in crypto thinks is worth talking about. And so I've appreciated your support in kind of getting this off the ground. And again, really focusing on things as far as, I guess, tenants in the space. And the reason why I found THORChain back a couple of years ago was really because some Bitcoin OGs, Eric Voorhees, wrote a lot about THORChain and really talked about why your project is kind of important. And I guess we'll start there, especially in the backdrop and context of where we sit with a lot of centralized exchanges, including Celsius, going down, locking user funds, and what the promise of decentralized exchanges offers. So why don't we start with, in your words, the best way to explain the difference between a centralized exchange and what decentralized exchanges unlock?
Well, one's good, one's not so good. No, I'm kidding. But a centralized exchange obviously is just one that is run and operated by some legal entity that exists in some part of the world somewhere, right? They are beholden to whatever the governing body around them, makes them do, right? And that includes, KYCing, which means know your customer, identifying who you are as an individual, documenting what you're trading, when you're trading, how much you're trading, and kind of invading your private space. And a decentralized exchange is kind of the inverse of that in some sense. It's not owned or operated by anybody else. It shouldn't be if it is not a decentralized exchange. and it's not really beholden necessarily to any particular, governing body per se, other than the community itself. So it oftentimes for me it's a requirement in order to have this space where we all value self-sovereignty and liberty and these kinds of ideals. If you require a centralized exchange to get in and out of, Bitcoin, for example, well, that kind of defeats the point of Bitcoin to some extent, right? Because if you have to ask Uncle Brian Armstrong if it's okay for you to buy some Bitcoin, then it's a little bit of a problem now, isn't it? And so I think that's one of the reasons why THORChain is so unique and such a significant value proposition for the entire industry, is that it's the only one that allows you to trade in any kind of real volume in and out of Bitcoin and other layer one ecosystems that have been largely just forgotten about or ignored from a DeFi perspective.
Yeah, and I guess the transparency piece is pretty important as well. When we talk about, I guess, the data and seeing everything play out, right? And that's kind of the difference, at least the way that I see it, having covered traditional finance for a long time, and what happened with Celsius is, like, if you're dealing with quote unquote centralized crypto lenders, as they're called, right? Money goes into this black box, and you don't really know who's on the other side. You don't know the risks in some of these institutions, how levered they are. Whereas, with a lot of DeFi platforms, not just THORChain, but I think we can talk about, some of the other ones as well. Some of that transparency is helpful for people to know whether or not they want to put that in. I mean, how key is that, and how important is that to stress when you're just kind of explaining this to people who are new to the space?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the entire industry is based upon the idea of, like, don't trust, verify, right? And so THORChain is obviously one decentralized exchange in the world, but it has the ability to, anybody in the world can verify how much Bitcoin it has, and how much BNB it has, and how much whatever asset it is, how much should it have. The network itself actually checks its own solvency autonomously and will halt itself if it finds that something happened where there isn't as much Bitcoin as there should be in the network all of a sudden. The network will actually, purely through autonomous mechanisms, to observe that, recognize it, and then pause everything and wait for humans to come in and say, okay, what went wrong here? Was it a bug? Was it an exploit? Was it what's going on? And then we fix it, move on, and carry on.
We might just reset the little Twitter spaces here in case you're just joining us. Sometimes we have late stragglers fall into this thing. And to reset, I'm Zac Guzmán, the host of Coinage, a Web3 community-owned crypto show that highlights some of the most important projects in Web3, in crypto. And excited to be joined here by Chad Barraford, the tech lead at THORChain. And we're just talking about the importance of decentralized exchanges. And I think, one of the other things we can get into is what makes THORChain unique, not just in the sense that it is a decentralized exchange and ability to swap without centralized custodians or anything like that, but also what makes it different than the other decentralized exchanges.
Yeah.
Uniswap is one that I think maybe even people not in crypto have heard of.
Yep.
And, that's built on Ethereum, and it uses wrapped tokens.
Yep.
So why don't you talk to me about what makes THORChain different than other decentralized exchanges?
Yeah, well, Uniswap was one of the first, and it was a great implementation, a great idea. Hayden was the guy behind that. He did a great job of it. And today, Uniswap is, $1 billion, multi-billion-dollar, whatever it is. But what we felt the problem that needed to be solved was that we needed a methodology for being able to move value, not just within a particular ecosystem like Ethereum, like what Uniswap does or what have you, but we want to be chain agnostic, asset agnostic, right? If you want to solve this problem, we want to solve it in a universal way that can be applied to not just EVM chains like Ethereum or AVAX or Polygon or what have you. We want to solve it for Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. Why not? Monero. I mean, any of these assets or chains could be added to THORChain. There's nothing actually stopping it from doing it other than just the time that it requires to engineer such things. But we wanted to be a holistic solution to a larger problem and become critical infrastructure for the entire industry as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like that's important because a lot of times people don't really understand, wrapped Bitcoin, wrapped Ether. It's kind of like, those are centralized kind of points. We're learning a lot this year about centralized points of failure as, project or company after company goes down in this space and needs to be rescued. So any centralized point of failure is worth digging into and maybe worth raising some red flags if people truly care about decentralization in that crypto ethos.
Right.
And
anytime you see a wrapped asset in the world today, it is always a trust-based system in all cases and scenarios. You cannot economically secure a wrapped asset. Just structurally, it's just not feasible. That's why THORChain has a very different design. That's why it doesn't use wrapped assets at all. It only trades real layer one assets.
And the way you kind of enable that is interesting because, you know, I guess the token itself is worth talking about.
Yep.
And so THORChain's the project. Rune is the token.
Correct.
Full disclosure, I think I bought some Rune back, 2 years ago when we were talking about it as well, but it's not, significant by any means, since I don't have that much money. But Rune itself is interesting to get into because it's kind of, again, when you think about any tokenomics, it's like, all right, what is the problem that this is solving, right? And like that gets lost, I think. A lot of people who are new to crypto, they might just see a token and might say, okay, this is worth buying because the number could go up. But introducing a token in this context enables some of what you're talking about, where it's chain agnostic. You need something to kind of control where the money's going between chains. And so talking about kind of the structure of Rune in the context of Thor.
Yeah, Rune was a requirement. You couldn't economically secure this network without its own token. You could make the base token of this network to be Bitcoin, for example. There'd be problems with that, which is a different topic. But if you did, then it would mean that if somebody were to acquire enough validators and take over the network, they could just steal not only the Bitcoin that they brought in to become a validator, but also everybody else's Bitcoin, everybody else's Ethereum, and walk away, a lot more wealthy. And so in order to ensure that can't happen, is that the token that you use to bond up, to become a validator is the Rune token. And if somebody were to steal the network, to acquire, all the validators or whatever, the money they spent to get to that place, the value of that Rune will go to zero. Because if the network is exploited and all the funds are gone, then the value of the token is basically inherently zero, which is a good thing because that means that that person will always lose money in all circumstances. So they could spend, $100 million buying enough Rune to, run enough nodes to do so.
Yeah.
But they'll steal, 30 million or 50 million, whatever how the number would be. I'm just making up numbers off the top of my head here, but they would steal far less than they've spent, and then the original 100 million they spent would go to effectively zero. And that's how we make sure that from an economic perspective, this stuff is always secure, not just from a cryptographic perspective or from a community perspective, but just from an actual economics. It doesn't make sense to attack the network.
That's like kind of the important thing across all crypto projects is I love the beauty of a lot of the incentive alignment and some of the game theory in all of this, right? And structuring these things, which is always kind of fun to watch, at least from kind of, trying to architect a security mechanism or just in general, like how all this stuff is going to work. Obviously, you guys took your time to set that up, right? It was ChaosNet, the quote unquote beta version of THORChain for a long time. You guys had some security exploits as like bridges. We've learned so much in the last couple of years as far as like in and out where some of those exploits can happen. I mean, what have you learned, I guess, if you set this up, fixed some of those bugs, taken the time, told everyone, look, this is in beta, don't put all your money in here. Like, how has that over the years kind of played out in a way that you've learned these things and gotten it to where it is now?
Well, I definitely feel like we made the right move early on to launch it as a beta, not to go straight to quote unquote mainnet and just YOLO our way into it and then accept $1 billion in the network day one, which we've seen projects do that and we've seen them all, oftentimes, lose it all. But that's why we limited in the beginning. We made a lot of really important learnings as part of that process. And so when we had those bugs in the earliest days of that beta, we retooled, we rebuilt entire new teams internally just for the purpose of security. We made these large changes to the network that just makes the network, give the network ability to protect itself autonomously from somebody trying to exploit it without anybody being part of that. Even if you find an exploit that we don't know about, right, and you try to exploit it, oftentimes you would not be able to extrapolate money out of the network to do so, which is pretty fascinating. We learned a lot of important things around it's important to have a well-documented bug bounty program to help incentivize white hats to come by and fix issues for us. But we always knew that this is one of the most technically complex, one of the most ambitious projects, certainly in the DeFi space, if not in general crypto. And we had to take it slow. We had to get, intentional. We couldn't just build together in 3 months and then launch it and then whatever happens, happens. We were in alpha for over a year, running on what we call single chain chaosnet, and then beta ran for about a year, and we weren't mainnet until a few months ago.
And just to, I guess, maybe translate some of that, when we're talking about mainnet and swaps across different chains, maybe even people don't realize, especially if you're new to the space, Bitcoin is a separate network than Ethereum. It might look like, okay, I can go to Coinbase and buy all these tokens in one spot. They're entirely different networks. So, it's not easy to just go from one to the other. And you guys have been slowly, building out what chains you support and how you can swap between all these things. I mean, I guess bigger picture too, why this matters for any person out there is very similar to banks, right? Is what do you want to do with your crypto assets? And you can store them at a Celsius and a centralized, I guess, quote unquote, crypto bank. And we see the risks there. Any bank can fail. And if there's not FDIC insurance or anyone there to come in when times are tough, other than maybe SBF, then, these are risks that people need to consider. And so I guess, you guys have built out the roadmap now. As you add more and more chains, there are more and more opportunities to earn yield on crypto assets, no matter what they are, and swap. And you guys are also working on Thor savings, which is new, which I assume is even easier for people to understand in terms of just bring your assets, park them here on THORChain, earn yield.
That's part of the value, I think. I think being a liquidity provider in a traditional DEX is somewhat complicated. There's a multiple moving pieces to it, and there's impermanent loss, which is a kind of a difficult thing for a lot of people to comprehend. And to understand, am I making money? Am I losing money? It becomes very difficult. And I think that's part of the value of what Thor Savings is becoming, is that it becomes more like a savings account in your bank, in a traditional sense, in that you just put in some dollars and you come back later and there's more dollars than there was before, and there's not much more to it than that. And I think that's the value of this in some sense. Also, part of the value is that it takes such low cognitive requirements to actually understand what it is and how I make money off of it.
And the reason why you're able to do that too is that they're using your liquidity, right? You're putting money in.
Yes.
If people want to swap, they can swap your money and then it goes somewhere else.
Right.
And you're rewarded for it.
Right, exactly. The network itself produces income because it provides a valuable service that people are willing to pay money for. I want to swap my Bitcoin to Ethereum, and I'm willing to pay a fee to do so, which is just common to see. And so the network produces just a natural yield from that process, and then we can take that yield and say, all right, well, thank you for providing your Bitcoin to the network. Here's some more Bitcoin, per the fees that are being collected by this network for that purpose. So it's providing a reasonable good for the world to utilize, in which case the world will provide capital to do so.
How, I guess, as we talk about, the value of Rune also has kind of gone up and down in the waves of the bull and bear market, as all cryptocurrencies do. But I suppose, again, a token that's tied to kind of a real project providing a real service always, I feel like, would come down to adoption, or at least, I guess, the number of dollars or whatever you want to use as the measurement of currency, but the amount of money flowing through THORChain itself. Yep. So, I mean, how do you see that kind of adoption process going? What have you seen? And I guess, maybe in the bear market it's tapered off a little bit, but what is the plan there as far as adoption? Because you're right, I feel like a lot of this stuff might be complicated for anyone new to the space to know how to use a wallet, how to store a seed phrase. Yep. What are you seeing now?
Well, so we're starting a process that's going to be a long process, but one that's really important. And so we're recently starting to integrate with other exchanges, with wallet manufacturers. And so people go to their Edge wallet, for example, is a recent wallet that just adopted THORChain into its UI. And so if you want to swap between Bitcoin and Ethereum on Edge wallet, THORChain is now behind that. Same thing for Shapeshift. Shapeshift ripped out their back end, threw in THORChain to replace it, just because it allowed them to do what they want to do without needing to do KYC anymore. We're going to see more of that happening over the course of this year. Nine Realms, especially, has been another team that's associated with THORChain, has been just banging on that drum for a while now, and they're doing a great job of it.
Yeah, we should get into KYC and what that even means. Know your customer, right? When we're talking about banks and kind of, again, we saw this with Tornado Cash too. I think we're in a new chapter of governments realizing what's happening with crypto, the scale of crypto, and how it's a threat to, I think, the traditional financial system and their control.
Yeah.
And if
for some reason, they don't want to give up that control. I'm not sure why.
But it's not surprising, I suppose. If you're in control, you might not want to give it up. But at the same time, I guess this is kind of the funny thing to crypto native people. And I don't know, if you're in the space, it might not seem like it, or maybe it does. But to me, and I don't know if you'd agree, crypto people generally maybe, I don't want to say neurotic, but very protective of their privacy.
Yes. No, there's definitely a correlation there for sure. I think I think what's fascinating is that in the meat space, we don't have all that much privacy in a sense, like at least from a finance perspective.
Yeah.
And people have kind of grown and in that space, and it kind of seems normal. It seems like it's okay. It seems like it's like, you know. But the thing is that like privacy is actually normal. It's been around for obviously a lot longer than traditional finances, and it wasn't until recently that traditional finance, like recent in terms of the last like 100 years, that we start to lose our privacy within the finance sector. So it is funny. Like I think as an individual, I've become more privacy focused as I've kind of gone deeper down this crypto rabbit hole in some sense. But it makes sense that people want their privacy. You know, to me that's a basic human right that exists prior to government, and I don't think government should have the ability to take that away from us.
Yeah, it's strange. It's a really weird back and forth that even I have, because it's like, right, any money laundering, I suppose, might be good. You don't want people to maybe money launder. But the other one, anti-terrorist or terrorism checks on Know Your Customer, like might also be good, because you don't want, I guess, we've seen North Korea pretty active in terms of their crypto exploits. Yeah. You don't want money flowing into like bad things necessarily. And I think there are some things that objectively would be bad. But I mean, it's a sliding scale, as almost everything is in 2022. Everything's on a spectrum, I suppose. And there are pros and cons of some of this.
Yeah, I mean, you can't have cars without car accidents. It's a natural thing to happen. Whenever you invent some new technology that just empowers people on a massive scale, like automobiles or airplanes did or the internet did, there's always some ramification to it, some negative thing that happens. That doesn't mean that we can't do our best to fight against such things, but it's not a good reason to not engage with it. We shouldn't just abandon cars and completely just because people get injured from that.
When we talk about, I guess, the use case of all this and the adoption, what have you seen? Like, what are the actual numbers for where THORChain sits? We've talked about different measures on, a lot of Coinage chats to track adoption, whether it's total value locked, whether it's actual users, the best ways. How do you kind of look at it? What are the metrics?
I mean, for me, I don't actually look at that too much. Like, I just ship. I think about what the world needs, what would provide significant value, and the adoption, I think, will just naturally come over time. We can talk about TVL, we can talk about trade volume, we can talk about unique wallets and blah, 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 these things, but like those things just come and go. Like, they're not really strong indicators just because it correlates with things that's unrelating to your network, right? Like just the macro sense of things. Like right now, the trading volume on THORChain is like per day is like around $20 million, right? Which is a lot lower than it was, pre-Terra collapse, things. It doesn't mean that's because THORChain's failing as a network or anything like this. It just means that the market's gone pretty bare. I look at more of the fundamentals of like, what is it that we're doing as a project? Are we improving things and making more centralized? Are we adding new strong features to the network that just improves people's ability to do what they want to do without being, censored or these things? That's the only thing that really matters to me.
I don't know if we checked before we started the Spaces if you're down. I mean, this is technically hosted by THORChain. I don't know if you normally open it up for Q&As, but we are in a Spaces. I don't know if I should invite other people to throw questions.
We do a Spaces like every Friday, and a QA is part of it.
All right, well, we'll definitely add that to the mix here. So if you want to request it, I know your guy's also on here as a co-host, so he can help bring people up.
I think Kyle's there to manage that if he's able.
Yeah, he can bring people up if there are questions. I want to get to those, on the Spaces, because that's something we often do on this too. And also just a reminder, kind of, what we are and what we're doing, and kind of how we want to invite, also people in the THORChain network, as they may be, to Coinage. You can go to coinage.media/join for an invite. Right now we're an invite only. We're trying to, I guess maybe early on, make sure that we're bringing the people who understand the vision like yourself, who know kind of why a Web3 community on crypto show is needed in this space. I think that's important, because we see a lot of maybe biased coverage sometimes in the crypto space. Maybe. And so,
that's one of the reasons why I wanted to get involved with Coinage, because I just felt that there's so much media in this space that is biased, that is shilling, that is non-educated, doesn't look for actual things of substance, but just things that will make numbers go up in some sense. And that's one of the things I appreciate about you, Zach, and about what you're doing here is actually bring journalism, legitimate, actual, real, quality journalism to this space. Anybody who does that, I would support.
Thank you very much, man. I appreciate that, because I guess it wasn't an easy decision to jump full on into this, but I think anyone watching this space knows deep down, and we've all been through cycles for a long time. I don't know, I've owned Bitcoin since 2014, so I've certainly seen the waves. I know you've seen the waves. It's like, the builders in the space are so genuine in the way of like what they're trying to solve. I've never seen conviction like I have in Web3, and it's just super exciting to kind of have these chats and get into kind of like why we're doing what we're doing, because builders actually believe in what they're doing, and they wouldn't spend so much time doing it if they didn't.
Yeah.
But let's see. I don't know if there are the people with their hands raised over here. That's important to keep, eyes on. I'll try and do my best in tracking it all. But yeah, no, appreciate the words there. And again, anyone following Chad is a Chad in my eyes. And so if you apply at coinage.media/join, we'll check that out. And obviously, there's no need to follow us or follow anybody else or retweet anything. It's just really trying to find good partners who can build this with us.
What's funny is one of the guys on the core team, I met him, and he's like, oh, he didn't think my name was actually Chad. He thought that was like, some sort of pseudonym or whatever it is. I had to show him my credit card to convince him that my name was actually Chad.
It is funny to see how the community is, right, in all of these, and that's a key aspect of any crypto project, is the community itself.
Yes.
THORChats, as they're called now. I don't know if that came from you.
No, it did not come from me. Certainly not. The first time I saw that, it was some meme, right? And at that time, I didn't know what a chat was. Like, I didn't know my own name was a thing. And so, like, they're talking about this, like, THORChat thing, and I was like, how is this? I didn't understand how it related to me.
Yeah.
I'm like, how does this relate to me? I thought it was like poking fun at me or something like this, but I had no idea what the whole chat concept.
There's Link Marines and Chainlink. There's THORChats. There's all kinds of things out there. And I don't know. The community aspect's another one that is kind of unique. And I think we have a mix of people who have followed Coinage and a mix of people who follow THORChain itself in this space. And I don't know, I feel like that's also worth exploring in terms of like how the community's grown as well. Yeah. You can talk about decentralization in terms of who's running the THORChain nodes and what you've seen there. You can talk about, I guess, just generally the community. I mean, how important is that to you as someone who's kind of like building a project like this out?
Oh, that's all critically important. It's all part of the road to decentralization, right? And so one of the things we structurally just thought from day one is that we want nodes to be anonymous. We don't want them to be doxxed. They don't want them to, they can if they choose to. We're not going to yell at anybody who does. But like, we want the standard to be that nodes are anonymous individuals across the entire world. I don't know who the node operators are. I don't want to know who the node operators are.
For security reasons.
For security reasons, because if you know where they all are, if I know that you're running a node and I'm running a node and they're all running nodes or whatever, we can kind of like go some backroom deal somewhere and try to do something that maliciously potentially. But in this system, like the only way that nodes can actually communicate with each other is just through the public Discord, not even through privately. We have a different mechanism that they can publish and verify to our Discord that they are sending a message that this node operator, whoever he, she, or they are, can say something, but can only do it in a public forum. It can't do it in a private forum. And that's important just to make sure that there's as most difficult as it possibly can be for nodes to coalesce and brunch together, which has happened in the Cosmos space. Literally, they all came together and had brunch, which is just a terrible idea.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who wanted to attack, if you're in a physical location, that's always, that's a more violent way to attack, but I suppose it's also a risk. I mean, when we talk about all this, as far as adoption goes, we had Anatolia from Solana in our studio here in Brooklyn a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about adoption. And, adoption, as I said, can be measured in terms of like who's actually paying attention. But I think it's also the lessons that a lot of people talk about when we say like, not your keys, not your coins.
Yeah.
It's like a catchphrase that like was kind of something that maybe, if you heard it, you might not understand until the shit hit the fan and you had a lot of centralized exchanges go down. And then it was a real learning lesson for a lot of people like, oh, this is what not your keys, not your coins means.
That's the kind of funny thing about like, if you were around from the Mt. Gox days, you learned that back then, like the result of that. But if you just joined crypto after that point, maybe you hadn't learned that lesson yet. So it's like every time we have these bear markets, bull markets, and a whole new influx of people come in who weren't around for the 2017 things and the 2013 events and all these other stuff, then they have, and sometimes they have to kind of relearn the things that the more seasoned individuals have known about. But we'll keep kind of pushing that idea of like not your keys, not your crypto, because it's important.
Well, I don't know if it's a good or bad thing, because like you can take it both ways, right? And I guess this is something that SBF has talked about as well, who's also a Coinage Network NFT holder like yourself. But he's mentioned like, if it goes too far, then no one's left as far as like retail users of crypto, because they've been burned. And this year especially bad. If you had money in Celsius or you had money in Terra, those are two huge events that could have destroyed a lot of people this year, to the point where maybe the whole pie shrunk a lot and just said, I don't want anything to do with crypto. Or they could have been like, okay, I've learned a lot of lessons, depending on, I guess, how big the losses were. And you could say that might be a positive in terms of lessons learned. I don't know which one's right, but you'd prefer lessons that are learned in maybe a good way than a bad way.
I mean, self-experience is always a great way to learn something. Right? Yeah. Success is a terrible teacher oftentimes. You learn a lot more from failures than you do with successes in some cases. And so, but things like Ponzi scheme, that's been around for, hundreds of years, and it'll be around for more hundreds of years. And people just need to learn that sometimes through experience of, when we talk about a pyramid and all these things, you shouldn't invest into such things. But some people got to learn,
I guess so Anatoly said it's like 1995, where people are understanding not your keys, not your coins. They're learning how to use a wallet, how to sign things. And so I guess in his view of the world, it's 1995 in the early tech days, which means we still have a lot. I think everyone knows we have a long way to go, but it's like checkpointing where we are really in some of the things that crypto is trying to prove. I mean, would you agree with that? It's about 95 in like comparing it to the old tech boom? Because like some people might say this year is the big bubble of the tech collapse, just when you look at what's happened to crypto.
I mean, I wouldn't say 95. That'd be too early from my perspective. Like in technological adoption, there's something called like an S-curve. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of this concept before or not, but it's the idea that the whatever time it takes to adopt the first 10% of people into some new technology, whether it be telephones, internet, or whatever, that amount of time you'll get to 90%. So if you took 10 years, which I think about 10 years or 11 years for Bitcoin or the industry to kind of get 10% adoption, which means it's taken approximately about 10 years to get to a 90% adoption of crypto. And so if you look at that mentality, then we're probably not 95, we're probably closer to like 2005. And at least my mentality, that's true. But who knows?
Yeah. I mean, no one ever really knows, I guess, as we've all seen, this year play out. But I mean, I guess, you talk about the strength in learning from failures. And I don't know, I guess if you flip that around and be like, there are no such thing as failures, there's only learning opportunities out there. And, you've been at this for years. When did THORChain start? I actually don't know when the beginning was.
This implementation started in July 2019.
Okay. So it's been a while.
Yeah, been a few years.
What would you say, I guess, are the biggest learnings that you've had on the journey in terms of, everything that could go wrong or did go wrong, and things that you've learned along the ways and things that went right?
There's been a lot of learnings along the way. Jeez, where do I start? One is that I think people make the mistake is you actually don't need that much capital, right? If you want to start a project like this, THORChain is probably more extreme because it took a long time to design, architect, and innovate the thing that it does. Mm-hmm. It's unusually long in that sense. But even in THORChain's case, so like initially had like maybe $1.5 million of investment, not $6 billion like we've seen other projects kind of manifest on like day one or whatever. That's just a ludicrous amount of money.
Yeah.
You don't need that much capital. You don't need that much in terms of engineers. You don't need that much in terms of marketing and all these things. Like we only had like 9 or 10 people in the team. Almost every single one of them was a dev. And we just focused on shipping and just building something that really solves a hair on fire problem.
In the crypto space, I feel like there's a lot of people who sometimes might attack other projects to kind of make theirs look better or something like that.
That's
It's common.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say necessarily that I have you in my eyes in that camp, right? Because, there's Uniswap, there's a lot of other decentralized exchanges. I mean, how do you look at like the competition in the space? Is it competitive? Is it kind of, we build, they build, we see what happens? But like, how do you view how some of those projects maybe have been able to bring in a ridiculous amount of money, and kind of where you see THORChain fit into that?
Yeah. Historically, like THORChain as a project, we were generally pretty positive towards other. We never like went out and attacked Uni or anything like on Twitter or whatever. Like we've always been pretty positive and supportive. We've even told people we would fund people to fork our code and build another exchange just like it, just because it's better and more healthy for the industry if we have 5 ways of moving across chains instead of effectively 1. And even though THORChain's been around for like actually running and trading assets for over 2 years now, there's still nobody in the industry that does what we do. And there's been many people, other projects that have been trying to fork THORChain, either fork its code like Maya or just fork its design like Chainflip, but they still haven't launched yet. it's a very technologically complex project, and it's hard to even fork. It's not like, forking Uni is pretty easy. It's just a couple thousand lines of code. There's not much going on there. It's just a little bit of business logic. THORChain is a lot more complicated to understand the inner workings of it, how it all structured and it works. So it's very difficult. Not that it's impossible, but it's very difficult to fork, which is why to this day we are the only exchange that actually supports cross-chain swaps in the way we do.
The regulatory piece of that too is also kind of interesting, just because we've talked a lot about why you're so into making sure you don't know who these node operators are and how you don't want to have that information in case any regulator maybe comes after you. You're also one of the rare, I guess, examples to point to in terms of a project, and you walking around here in New York. You're here with us in person in our studio in Brooklyn. And I wonder if the regulatory stuff, and I can ask you this as a fellow person who's living in the US, as you watch maybe some of these things, I alluded to earlier, but the crackdown now in terms of privacy, Tornado Cash, regulation, the SEC. I mean, where do you see kind of some of those red flags now popping up going in terms of what would happen if maybe THORChain fell into the crosshairs of regulators? Might not be big enough right now to
warrant
be there.
Yeah.
But as we've seen with other projects, it'd be surprising to kind of know which ones they really do want to target and go after. And I feel like one that is so dedicated to privacy might be one.
Yes, I mean that's one of the things that the community's been talking about for a long time, is adding privacy chains like Monero, for example. And for me, that's important. I think the ability to move in and out of Monero in a decentralized way is critical for the industry as a whole. I think that's a really important thing we should be fighting for. In terms of regulatory things, whatever happens. But what I know is I don't really pay too much attention to what's happening in the meat space. I don't want to have that kind of influence my decisions about what is right for the industry, what the industry actually needs to be solved.
For everybody listening to on the meat space thing, you keep saying meat space, just to be clear, we're not talking carne asada, we're talking something else.
Well, on meat space, it's just mean about the physical world that you and I are walking around in,
yes.
And the digital one.
Yes,
right.
Of course. Just wanted to clarify in case there were confused, hungry individuals.
Yeah, I'm talking about the butcher down the street.
Heavily regulated meat space.
No, I think the project has always looked about what is the thing that the industry needs, that the people need, that empowers people, that gives them the ability to freely move as they choose, and gives them the most self-sovereignty, and then move in that direction. And if there becomes a problem downstream with regulatory issues, then we'll take that on, right? And especially when it comes to privacy things, I am more than happy to take on that fight, because it's more than worth it.
I think, yeah, it's important. It's been interesting to see which builders in the space are actually, when shit hit the fan, earlier this year, projects start to go, it's interesting to see which builders are going to put up or shut up in terms of what do I want to throw my weight behind?
Yeah.
And what is important enough? And I think that's also going to happen to a lot of politicians in the space who have come out as pro Bitcoin or pro crypto. And then, when push comes to shove, how serious are they about some of these tenets of crypto? And it's been kind of fascinating to watch.
Yeah.
We've been doing the spaces for a bit. I think we might wrap up soon eventually, but just want to reset in case there are late stragglers who are confused about anything that we're talking about right now. And you might say, what the hell's the meat space? But I'm Zac Guzmán, the host of Coinage, a community-owned crypto and Web3 show dedicated to talking about the most important topics in the space, not in my view, but in the view of our NFT holders who call on the show with us. We have one of those NFT holders here with us today, who is also more commonly known as the tech lead at THORChain, a very popular decentralized exchange that is helping people swap between chains, that is chain agnostic. And we've covered, I think, a lot of this stuff for everyone learning about the space today. I guess we'll wrap up on I guess, a more positive outlook for the space, which is I always say pretty important in some dark days for a lot of people in crypto who have seen prices maybe come down a bit. But as we said, we've been through this before. We've seen these cycles before. To you, I mean, how do you look at kind of where we're at and what's ahead for not just THORChain, but I suppose the crypto space writ large?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously we're in a bear market. That's pretty obvious at this point. But I think we've learned a lot from the last one. I'm hoping that we'll continue to learn more. I think bear markets are great because it just allows you to build, right? We're working on really important big figures over at the THORChain project as well, and other communities are also building really important things. So I'm really hoping that fast forward 2-3 years, that the whole industry is going to be just structurally different, and then it can support the industry in a much different way. Hopefully we can kind of burn away some of the old ideas of just like, fake yield and, poor designs and this stuff, and they kind of filter themselves out to some regard. And the ones that are structurally, sound, the ones that stick around. And THORChain is certainly one of those.
Yeah, I think it's been fascinating to watch all of kind of, we're all learning in the space together. I think that is one thing that is true.
Yep.
Right? And it's the space is obviously, as kind of a self-policing thing, is often ahead of where regulators are.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who are critical of a lot of projects that failed this year. Certainly ahead of the SEC, but maybe even hearing the names,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that's one important thing to also consider in terms of building and keeping eyes on these things. And again, that's also part of like why Coinage wants to exist, is to help kind of flag the learnings along the way with people like yourself that are very smart and have seen this stuff happen and know maybe some of the problems with other projects that certainly I can't catch either.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, we've covered a lot of everything here. I just want to thank you for coming to our studio.
No, thank you for inviting me.
It's not easy to come all the way to Brooklyn, New York sometimes. You don't understand. There's large boroughs. And this is the largest one of them all.
Yeah, it's a big city, apparently.
It's a big city. But Chad, I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you for coming to Coinage Studios here in Brooklyn. And please keep us posted on everything that THORChain's up to. I'm excited that we got to share this space with your followers, with our followers, and hopefully we can do this again.
Yeah, let's do it again, for sure.
Right on. All right. Well, sweet. I guess we'll wrap it there. Thanks, everybody. If you're interested in learning more, you can go to coinage.media/join. Chad, one last shout out for you all in terms of where you're going to be sending people to learn more.
Oh, yeah. THORChain.org, I think, is still the website, or .com. I changed it. And you can follow the THORChain Twitter account on here. You can follow them.
Or Chad as well, personally, on here as a speaker.
Don't bother. I'm boring. It's not that fun.
THORChads follow THORChads. That's what I always say. Thanks again, man. I appreciate it. It was good spaces.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Peace out, everybody.